Welcome back. You're listening to The Governor. Like, share, comment, subscribe as I bring you all the up-to-date information on the Great Reset we're currently living in. Today, we're going to be looking at a variety of topics that all seem to tie together in an abstract but interesting way. When you think about it, everything really is connected. Sometimes we as people have a tendency to force these connections to find what we want to believe. But more often, I find people don't think hard enough about these connections, and we end up repeating cycles of grief and hardship because we aren't paying enough attention to the world around us. In our daily lives, we are bombarded with issues and non-issues, masquerading as real issues. So I don't blame people for avoiding the issues altogether. For most people, ignorance really is bliss. If I were to get into everything that's on my mind, even just on these topics alone, this would be a 4-hour-long video. So I'll try to be as concise and to the point as possible. Today, I'm going to show you how 4 things are subtly connected. These 4 things are the recent discovery of child remains of the atrocities at the residential schools across Canada, the alleged murder or suicide of eccentric billionaire and software mogul John McAfee, 3, the response to the COVID pandemic, and 4, the corrupt nature of government. These are broad subjects that take a lot of time and thought to disseminate properly. 3/4 of the topics in this video are unraveling right before our very eyes as I make this video. The corrupt nature of the government has always been with us, which makes the fight against it seem hopeless, as it is the root cause and ties together all the problems listed above. Like I said, I will not be able to fit all the information into one video, so this may become a series of videos depending on the response I get. So if I get a lot of engagement in the comments or the likes, I will make this a series. The first thing we're going to look at are the not so recent discoveries of the child remains at the residential schools in Canada. This may be the biggest tragedy in Canadian history, as children are the epitome of innocence. And when you find this many bodies in the fields of the schools, you know that there is no good explanation. People, myself included, wanted to believe that Kamloops was an isolated incident, and maybe it could be attributed to an outbreak of sickness of some sort. It turned out that sickness was the people running the schools, and it was not isolated to just Kamloops. It was a nationwide problem. Again, I really can't put into words how bad I feel for the Indigenous community. This is beyond horrific. However, that is why I'm such an advocate for learning about history and retaining history, not tearing down monuments, good and bad, because as we all know, if you don't learn from history, you are doomed to repeat it. Hopefully monuments are created with the children's names in all these locations so that we can look back, remember them, and never allow that to happen again. Now, back in April of 2020, long before these official discoveries were made, an article was produced by the CBC in which a doctor tried to sound the alarm bells when he discovered 104 years ago that between 24 and 69% of Native children that were taken to residential schools never came back. This doctor's name is Peter Bryce. Born in Scotland, he came to Canada, studied at the University of Toronto, and became a founding member of the Canadian Public Health Association. He was then recruited by the Canadian government at the age of 51 to be the Chief Medical Health Officer of Canada. After the discovery of the high percentage of Native children dying in residential schools, Bryce was sent by the federal government to find out what was happening. Bryce's recommendations were dismissed by Duncan Campbell Scott, then head of Indian Affairs. Scott was the man who oversaw the Indian residential school system, the man who stated that his goal was to, quote, get rid of the Indian problem, unquote. Scott eventually terminated Bryce's funding for research. The Canadian government, quote, tried to disparage Bryce. Quote, they stopped him from presenting at academic conferences because they didn't want this news to get out. And eventually, they pushed him out of the public service. But even then, he wasn't silent. So what we are seeing here is a doctor hired by the Canadian government to find the cause of a problem. The doctor finds the problem along with a solution. The government deems the findings too hard to deal with, too much to handle, and sweeps the issue under the rug, and the problem festers. Seems to be a running theme with most governments, I find. Don't forget, these are the same governments that told you that smoking for pregnant women was healthy, allowing the Tuskegee experiments, encouraging lobotomies, funding of MK Ultra, the Gulf of Tonkin false flag, and injecting people with plutonium. Yeah, these are the same governments that are so concerned about your health and safety during this pandemic. Power corrupts. Absolute power? Well, you know the thing. Next, we'll be moving on to the story of John McAfee being Epstein. Unfortunately, this is a pretty hard topic to research as it is a very recent happening. Even many months later, nobody really knows what happened to Epstein himself. The only thing we know is that Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. I really don't like to report on stuff that isn't entirely provable, but I have no problem asking the hard questions. And there's too much coincidence to not be suspicious of a high-level hit job. Again, I will not be able to prove anything right now in this video, but I have found some bizarre info on this subject that deserves a share and discussion in the comments. So let's get into the hard questions. Number 1. He told people back in 2019 that he would never kill himself. He even got a tattoo preemptively to state that he would never kill himself and that if he was found dead, that he was whacked. So, how are you going to tell me that he killed himself in jail, awaiting his extradition? Number 2. He owned an apartment in a Surfside building in Florida that made international headlines when it recently collapsed 9/11 style. That apartment may have contained hard drives with 31 terabytes of damning info on the deep state. Now, the average price of homes in that well-maintained 40-year-old building was between $600,000 to $700,000 American dollars, which seems pretty cheap for a prime beachfront owned by a tech billionaire. And you may be asking yourself, how do you know if it was well-maintained? I'm just looking at the outside. It looked pretty nice. Number 3. Well, which begs the question, why would the deep state be after McAfee? Being a tech tycoon, he may have had access to servers that contained copies of Hillary Clinton emails. And if you don't already know, just research all the people around the Clintons that have allegedly mysteriously gone missing after scandals break involving the Clintons. A popular search is Clinton body count. Number 4. McAfee was trying to get into politics to change the corrupt tax system. He was then charged with tax fraud, accused of the same thing he was trying to solve. Weird. The left also loves to project. Projection is where whatever you're guilty of, you accuse somebody else of. You're projecting your problems onto somebody else or your issues, your shortcomings, whatever it may be. That's what projection is. I don't know McAfee that well. He seems like a pretty wild guy, a very paranoid guy. And until this story broke, I would have not recognized him in a crowd. I'm not even 100% sure if I like the guy, but he's anti-establishment, so he wins points from me right away. As I said, I'm not proving anything here. I'm just asking important questions that deserve answers, wherever they may come from. The more we talk about it, if we don't forget about it, the truth will come out somehow. Now, we're going to move on to the pandemic. There have been so many highly credible doctors going against the narrative on this one. Many doctors, nurses, people in education, etc. have had their livelihoods threatened if they didn't toe the party line. Luckily, some of these people have FU money and don't answer to anybody but themselves. I also have to make an aside here. There have been teachers and nurses that want to speak up and thank people for speaking up for them on these issues. My message to those people is this: stop being such a fucking pussy. You cowards gotta band together and speak up. The hospital can't fire an entire staff. This could be a movement if people didn't care so much about what other people think about them. Educate yourself on the topic so hard that you can approach a debate with confidence. That's all it takes. These are some doctors worth checking out. Dr. Kary Mullis, inventor of the PCR test. Dr. Robert Malone, inventor of mRNA technology. His Dark Horse podcast with Dr. Brett Weinstein is well worth a listen. Another favorite doctor of mine right now is immunologist and vaccinologist Dr. Byram Bridle. Kary Mullis unfortunately died before the pandemic hit, but he had some choice words for Fauci while he was still kicking. All other doctors listed have been gagged on some level by the powers that be, and they are speaking out about it now. If these guys were able to get this message out on a mass scale, on a mainstream media platform, the jig would be up. Dr. Rainer Fulmick, a German lawyer who took down Deutsche Bank for corrupt practices, is launching his Nuremberg 2.0 trial this week on July 3rd, 2021. He claims that all 10 Nuremberg codes have been violated during the pandemic, and he wants global leaders to pay. I would also like to see the bastards responsible for the lockdowns and the government response to the pandemic to be hanged and beheaded in the public square. That's just my personal thing. It sure would send a message to never let this happen again, and it would be very entertaining. I would pay big money to see that. And that's what happened during the first Nuremberg. People in the media, the doctors that did all these experiments on the Jews, they all got put to death. Now, the lies are real. The Fauci cover-up of the lab leak theory, the fact world governments buried ivermectin and other therapies in favor of rushed-to-market, non-FDA approved shots, speaks volumes. The arbitrary lockdowns destroying the economy, the references to Klaus Schwab's Great Reset nomenclature throughout political campaigns, the censorship of anything that did not perpetuate the narrative, the misinformation warnings on everything related to COOF. I could go on for hours. You know, that's what we're dealing with. Now we find ourselves on to point number 4, how this all ties into government corruption and what we would have to do about it. I think I made it pretty obvious that all these issues all stem from the highest levels of government. I've been anti-establishment for as long as I can remember. I understand that law and order are essential for a society to function properly, and somebody has to be in charge. There has to be a good leader. But I always thought there's a better way to do things. Do I have all the answers? Absolutely not. But Iceland proved that after their economy crashed and banks were totally screwed, asking the public to bail them out, the public refused and instead overthrew the government. In my humble opinion, I think full-blown revolution is the only way to get the change needed in the government of today. The way I see it, if you vote one good guy into a corrupt system, the system will corrupt him no matter what. Unless he's got screw you money like Trump did. Nobody could buy Trump, and that's important in this situation. Hopefully the Nuremberg 2.0 trials will take care of the problem, but I have high doubts that that will actually happen and people will actually be held accountable. If the trial fails, we need a global, at the very least, a few national revolutions. Ideally non-violent, and we would need to install some fresh blood into our institutions and lay down term limits from then on. We should never again allow people like Xiao Biden to be serving in government for 48 years. It's insane. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. If you liked it, hump that like button. All comments are appreciated, and please share this video. We need to get the message out that the governments of the world need to be held accountable for the atrocities they've committed and continue to commit against the public and individuals alike. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great night.